Ridge, Colorado, for April the 2nd, 2018. We have one counselor, Councilwoman Davis is absent tonight, but otherwise everyone is here. Thank you for being here. We will start our agenda with citizen comment on any items on the agenda, and we have one speaker signed up. We will hear now from Rachel Holteen. If you would enter and sign in, please.
Good evening. My name is Rachel Holteen, and I live at 4690 Balsam Street. And I'm here actually to talk to both of the agenda items, which is both the neighborhood revitalization strategy as well as the proposed plans to update the green at 38th and High. Sorry, I just walked in the door. So, so my first comments about the neighborhood revitalization strategy. I'm really excited to see that the city is moving forward with plans to revisit the strategy. I've read pretty much all of the city policies, and it is by far my favorite policy. I'm happy to be somebody who has a favorite. I think it's a policy that really has guided a lot of the work I've done in the city, and it's exciting to read the original version and see how much progress the city's made since it was adopted, I think in 2006, is that right? Yeah, five, thank you. So a couple things moving forward. One is, I think, the value of revisiting it isn't just to adopt another wonderful tough love policy, but to engage our citizens in a meaningful discussion about what the future of our city means to them. And I'm really excited to see the proposal that's been put forth by, it looks like it's the same contractor that did the original policy. So I really encourage city to work hard to find the people in our community who don't typically show up. And that's not an easy task. I know all municipalities really struggle with that, but I think for this particular policy process, it's really important for us to work hard and proactively to reach disenfranchised and typically silent voices in our community, make sure they're heard. I also realize that a neighborhood revitalization strategy is about revitalizing neighborhoods. It's inherent in the title. But I think it's really important, even with the rigorous outreach and values-based process that's proposed, that we work hard about what are the things that we want to preserve in that. I realize it's not the same as a comprehensive plan, but a lot of what makes our neighborhoods great are things that we need to not change. And so making sure that when we're talking about change and we're talking about commercial districts and redevelopment, that we're really clear on the things that need to stay the way they are, that make our community such a special place that we all love. So I didn't see a lot of language around that. And so I'm challenging council and our planning commission to really be stewards of that specialness. That having been said, I'm excited. It's going to be a great year. And I encourage you guys, we have Wheaties graduates and Spades who are specialists and highly trained experts. They're like our tactical division who would love to help support this process. Switching quickly with the blinking light here, I only have a couple seconds left. The redevelopment of the green is exciting to see. It obviously has played a role in a place where our community comes together. I am a little discouraged to see this discussion of reinvesting in the green without having seen much progress on 38th Avenue in the last couple of years. So I hope as we're talking about what to do with the green, and I realize that partnerships with the school district, that we're also doing that concurrently with what we should be doing on 38th Avenue to improve conditions for pedestrians in a Main Street place. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any other speakers here to speak on citizen comment? I don't see any, so we'll go on with our agenda. Our first item is the item number 1, the Neighborhood Revitalization Strategy Update Scope of Services.
Thank you, Mayor. This evening we also have Ken Johnstone, our Community Development Director, and Eric May with CZB. Eric is the local rep with CZB. They have a team of folks across the country. But as the speaker mentioned, CZB was the consultant that did the original NRS back in 2004, 2005. And staff felt that this was appropriate to sole source with this consultant group again, just because we feel the city would get the best bang for the buck, since they know the community very well. They did the first NRS, and we're asking for an update of the NRS. I think going out to a different firm would actually probably cost more money and would take more time, because they would have to reinvent maybe a lot of things that a similar consultant that worked on the first plan will not have to. So as the speaker mentioned, the previous NRS was adopted in 2005. It recommended numerous recommendations on how to address a lot of the deficiencies that the report found in our community. We've accomplished a lot over the last 10 years, and we do have a memo as an attachment in your staff report that we presented to City Council in 2016, I believe, that kind of gave you an update on the NRS, what we've accomplished and what we haven't accomplished yet. We do realize there's certain things that we haven't, that we still believe, and again, as the speaker mentioned, not to forget about some of the things in the community that we want to preserve and protect. I think those are important aspects of the original NRS, and then also any update that we look at. I don't think it probably wasn't spelled out too much in the scope, but I think that's the intent of the any type of update on the NRS is to have a very rich public engagement process that is involving a lot of different community members and different stakeholders to ask our community what is it that you like. And I think this line is in their scope of work. What is it you like about the city of Wheat Ridge? What are you willing to, I think the term they use, and maybe Eric can speak to this, what are you willing to pay to get? What's the term that Charles uses, Eric?
It's something along the lines of, what are you willing to pay to get what you say you want?
Yeah, exactly. So that's the main question I think that the proposal lays out for the process. And again, engaging the first NRS in 2005 was very comprehensive. It engaged many people, many different groups, many different stakeholders. There were numerous meetings across the whole city. So I believe we have requested, and I believe the scope of work in CZB's scope of work continues with that in this next phase. As I mentioned, we believe we accomplished a lot of the recommendations from the first NRS, and we've recently done an update on some of the statistics that were that came out of the report. If you remember looking at the original booklet, there's several of the pages in the back are a lot of different graphs and numbers that really break down what Wheat Ridge looks like, what it looked like back in 2005 compared to kind of our region. So many different demographics were analyzed and looked at. We did an update of those in 2016 also. Was that 2016? And so we have those, and we presented those to City Council in 2016. But that data will be used if we move forward with this scope of work. That data will be used as part of this update to the NRS. I want to turn it over to Ken maybe this is kind of in Ken's department somewhat. He relies on this document very heavily, and it's been adopted as part of our comprehensive plan, and it's a document that we refer back to quite a bit. So Ken, did you have any comments on kind of what our intent is with moving forward on this?
No, not much, but just briefly. I took this job and had the pleasure of working for the city of Wheat Ridge for a little over 10 years, and I started in 2007, and really the presence of this document was a big motivator for me, thinking that this was going to be a really exciting opportunity that a community was willing to kind of make a pretty stark assessment of where they were at that time, but then also look forward real proactively moving forward. And obviously it gave my department a pretty big to-do list over the years, and it's been exciting and a pleasure to have the support of numerous councils and the community to work forward on a pretty progressive and aggressive agenda in terms of how we manage change in this community, what our regulatory environments look like, and it's been fun to have that policy document. So it feels like a good time to take a look at this again. It feels like a good time to re-engage the community. It feels like the community wants to be re-engaged, and then just chart a path forward for the next 10 years. So with council support, I very much look forward to this effort and see where it goes. So.
Thanks, Ken. So we've been working with Eric and his team over the last couple of months, actually, of fine-tuning what a scope of work would look like for an update to this plan. And maybe backing up a little bit, an update of the NRS is in City Council's strategic plan, and you all have been sending in, thank you, your top 10 priorities. I think I have a couple that I haven't received yet, but for everybody that has sent them in, this item, majority of you have picked this as your top priority. A couple of you have picked it as number 2 or number 3. So this is a very high priority for City Council to move forward with this. As I mentioned, we worked with Eric for the last couple of months to fine-tune what a scope of work would look like, what a community process, engagement process would look like. There's a proposal in your packets. And I'd like to turn it over now to Eric to just tell you a little bit about who he is, who CZB is, and then we'll maybe open it up for questions.
Thanks, Patrick. First, I'd like to thank you all for having me here tonight, Patrick and the staff, and also all of you, council and the mayor. And it's been a good set of conversations with staff and with the mayor and with Tim involved as well, kind of getting to the point where we are now. I want to start by just sort of laying out a little bit of who we are and kind of how we work. So we are Alexandria, Virginia, which is Washington, D.C. area based firm, and there are 5 of us. So we're small, and we're also distributed. So even though we're based in Alexandria, there's only one of us there. One of us is here. That's me, obviously. Another's in Park City, Utah. Another's in Buffalo, and another is outside Philadelphia. And a lot of people ask, how does that work? And I say, I don't know a better way to make it work. So we get to travel the country. We serve a lot of clients, all kinds of clients, with all kinds of challenges, and we get to see it all. Our model allows us to do that. And so we do a lot of housing work, and we do that housing work on 2 ends of the spectrum: the very expensive places where affordability is a serious challenge, and then also on the very economically distressed end of the spectrum where it's not affordability, but it's more economic development and depressed home values. So a lot of that kind of work. And then we also do a lot of comprehensive planning, and we also do a lot of neighborhood revitalization. So what's interesting, before we get into a little bit of the highlights of the proposal, I want to call out that your first and only speaker tonight at public comment hit some really important points, and I almost could not have asked for a better intro than she provided. And that is to say that while there was a tough love message back in 2005, and that's not uncommon in our traditional neighborhood revitalization strategy process, because often what we find is you go to these communities, and it's like, imagine you're really sick. And choose whatever one you want. But if you're very sick and it's a grave illness, you don't go to your friends and say, how do you guys think we ought to treat this? What should we do? You don't do that. You go to the doctor and you say, Doc, what's wrong with me? And she tells you, here's what it is and here's what you're going to do. And you say, yes, ma'am. That's all there is to it. Neighborhood revitalization is very much like that. And so there's the 05 process was maybe a bit more in that category. But that's not where Wheat Ridge is today. You all know that Wheat Ridge is not where it was in 2005. Conditions are very different. So yes, this is called a neighborhood revitalization strategy, where we would be updating the 2005 version, but the conditions are such that we wouldn't look at it through that lens. We wouldn't say, you're on the edge of a very dangerous illness here and you need to follow the doctor's orders to a T. That's maybe was '05, that's not today. Today, you've got a bit more prosperity, right? You've been both good in terms of the things that you've done here locally to improve the community. Some of that is, a lot of that's following the original NRS. Some of that's in addition on top of that. And a lot of it is being good, right? We often say it's better to be lucky than good. You've had some luck, and luck is always important. So if we were in a mid to late 20th century era suburb attached to Toledo, Ohio, or Detroit, Michigan, we wouldn't be having the kind of conversation we're having tonight. You're attached to Denver. Denver's a growing area, and so that provides a lot of opportunities. And so that informs how we would go about a neighborhood revitalization planning effort differently here in Wheat Ridge. As part of that, it is important to honor the things that are working, the things that are going well. It's not only about things that are going wrong. Revitalization has that connotation, right? Things are wrong, we got to fix it. Some of that's still going to be true in Wheat Ridge, but a lot of it's not going to be. There's going to be things you want to preserve and keep, and that's an important part of whatever conversations might come out of this process. Another general statement is that as you read through, and I hope everyone had a chance to read this proposal, we tried to keep it brief and streamlined and easy to read and not bore you with 50 pages of, we've all read those, some of us have written those, we didn't want to do that to you. There's a lot of engagement work in this proposal, right? And in general, again, back to the doctor's orders, we wouldn't normally bake this amount of engagement into a revitalization strategy process. This looks more like the way we do comprehensive planning, actually, because you are at a place where the community's vision is going to become important in a different way from revitalization work. It's really about who are we, who do we want to be, a lot of those questions. To the extent that you're wrestling with some of those effects of newfound prosperity, of things that are going right, of new demand for residential and commercial real estate, right? That's manifesting in certain tricky issues, tricky political issues. They exist in a lot of communities that have these conditions. An ADU that allowed by right pops up in somebody's backyard. The neighbors didn't know about it. Now they're at a meeting and they're mad, right? Well, if we want to not have that happen again, how are we going to make different decisions? On what basis are we going to make those decisions? Those aren't things you want to be doing in a vacuum, or at least in our professional experience, things that planning commissions and city councils don't want to be doing in a vacuum. They want to have a community consensus that informs some kind of policy document that informs how they make their decisions. So that's the kind of thing that we think is going to be more important in this process than maybe had been important in the last process. So those are the general statements. Just by way of introduction for me personally, and I would be a big part of this team, but even though we are distributed, we have connections here in the region, not only because our firm was here to do the original work back in '05, but also because I live here. I've been here 6 years. I've got a planning and government background that precedes my time in Colorado, but I live up in Boulder County in Lafayette, and I worked for the city of Boulder for 5 years. And so watching those things happen in my own community, my neighboring community of Louisville, where Ken is an alum, and then also just in living that life in Boulder over those 5 years, we've got a lot of experience, the good and the bad, about how these issues play out in the community. So we bring that to bear, as well as things we've seen elsewhere, right? So even if the market context is different, even if the politics are different, we bring a lot of that sort of national experience to bear on this. I'll pause there, and before getting into any sort of these detailed steps, are there any questions or anything anybody wants to talk about at this point?
Questions for,
Okay,
keep going.
we'll forge ahead.
Yep.
I know everyone's trying to get out of here on time tonight. It's all relative.
Last Monday was midnight, so.
Okay. Well, I'm not going to be the reason you're here until midnight tonight, that's for sure. Basically, our process comes in 3 phases. It usually does. And those phases break down into basically analysis, engagement, and strategy. And so the analysis phase is really where we take an objective look and figure out what's happening, right? So setting aside most of the opinions, it's really about what do the numbers tell us, what are the data telling us. That's most of it. There's also, and that's the quantitative work. So we're looking at MLS data for real estate sales. We're looking at lease rates on your commercial stuff. We are looking at all the census data and all the numbers we can get our hands on. And then that's complemented by qualitative data. So it's a lot of focus groups, a lot of phone calls, a lot of one-on-one meetings with business people and realtors and others that staff and project participants will connect us with. That's pre-engagement. That's just sort of us getting the lay of the land. And so by the time we finish that, we sort of feel like we at least know objectively what's going on. And then the second phase, we bring all of that into an engagement process. And we're doing this all along the way with a steering committee that we work pretty hard. And so if we were to be retained to do this project in Wheat Ridge, we would have, let's call it about 15 people. It's usually 12 to 20, and usually you can get a good core group of 15. And we work them pretty hard over the course of 9 or 12 months, however long it takes, because they've got a couple important jobs. Number one, they've got to represent the community, and represent the community in a different way than you all represent the community. They've got to bring their perspectives to bear on, sort of their own, their family life, their being homeowners. They're thinking about going to work in the morning and commuting and thinking about taking their kids to the park and thinking about the grocery shopping and a lot of the more mundane day-to-day stuff that is just what life is about, right? Which is a bit different from many of the issues that you all deal with in this room on Monday nights. So they have to bring that perspective to bear, and then we're training them to facilitate a lot of the engagement work. So that's not a way for us to make money and push the work off on others. It's a lot of work to get that steering committee to a place where they can go out and do those meetings, and they've got their own perspective, and they've got a credibility that we don't have. And then when they get through that process, they've got a credibility that we really don't have, right? We can stand over there at the dais and tell you, here's what we see, here's what we think, here's what you ought to do. But by having this steering committee process, everything is filtered through people who live in Wheat Ridge and who have a stake in the future of this community in a way that an outside consultant just can't have, right? And so that becomes really important. And then certainly, once the project is done and you're working on implementation, they're the folks who are going to be your champions. They're going to say, you know what, I was locked in that room for 3 hours once a month for an entire year, and I want that to mean something, right? I'm committed to this process, and that's why we do it. The important parts of the engagement phase are a couple. One, we're doing regular check-ins, once per phase with you and around this table in a study session format, as well as your planning commission, and we're also doing public open houses. So we don't find in general that public meetings where it's, you fill up the high school auditorium or the gym and you put a microphone there and everybody comes and has their say, that's particularly productive. But we do find the open house format that is a place to vet and present the information that has been considered and put forward by the steering committee, that's a process that does work, and to do that at each part of the process so that by the time you get to the end, it should actually be quite boring, because when you get to the end, everyone should say, oh, well, I see what the report says, I see what the final presentation says, and we knew that already. If that's what people say, then we did a good job, because it means there are no surprises, right? That's how we tend to view it. So those are important components. The last component, which is something that we have come to use in the last couple of years, which is different from what you might have experienced, what anybody who was involved in this process in 2005 might have experienced, is this small group process. And so getting your steering committee folks to a place where they themselves are hosting and facilitating, with our support, dozens of small group meetings around the community, which probably we would target for, I'm not sure we put in the timeline, but it's in the middle. And so in this phase, that would probably be in the fall, late summer into the fall. I was looking at some numbers as I was sitting here waiting for the meeting to start, and it looks like it takes about, you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, about 1,000 votes to get elected to the city council here. Is that right? More or less? Okay, ballpark. So I don't know if we can hit 1,000, but we can get probably, we feel confident you can get 500 people. And those are like 90-minute conversations with 500 people. So that's really, really rich information. the ability to, again, it's a small sample out of the entire city of Wheat Ridge, right, which is tens of thousands, but it's a rich experience not only for the facilitators on your steering committee, but also for the people who attend, and the information is gold, right, the conversations are gold, and so we found that to be really, really important, and when you get to the end of the process, what is produced tends to hold up when you've gone through that process. So again, like I said a minute ago, when you get to the final presentation, on the night when the project draws to a close, and you share it in this format or somewhere else, everybody will say, yeah, that sounds right, right? It's a good way to get to consensus. And so that's what we would recommend in this case, and we hope the city would find that useful. And then the third phase is taking all of that, our objective look from the first phase, the engagement work from the second phase, and then you just put them together, and that essentially creates your strategy, right? So here's what we saw, here's what the community said, here are where we understood the strong points of agreement to be across the community. Here are the things where that were non-starters, or they were split 50-50, and there just wasn't going to be an easy answer in the short term to those things. But that all gets baked into the strategy and the action steps for moving forward. So that's kind of, I've been talking for a while now. That's a high-level overview of what the process is, how it works, and why we do things the way that we would do them. And we can take your questions.
Okay, Mr. Matthews.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have one question and one request. I'll do the request easy first because it's kind of easy. If we ever put out any surveys or whatever, somehow have questions going out to the people, there needs to be in item D, none of the above. One of the things I've consistently heard our constituents complain about is, do you want 10 foot, 20 foot, or 30 foot? And they're told, well, I don't want any of those. And they're told, well, that's too bad. That's your only choices. So we always have to have a none of the above, and if they're only 30% to say none and above, at least we ought to know that. Okay, so that's my one request, is kind of keep track of that. My question is on the steering committee. We're doing a citizen survey, and the surveyors have made the commitment that statistically we're going to have a representative cross sections of citizens taking the survey. How do you intend to accomplish and assure us that we're going to get a representative cross-section of our community on the steering committee?
First, I want, without criticizing anybody else's work or casting aspersions about other methodologies, it's, and I know how those methodologies work to get representative samples and how they weight things to do that. It's still a survey, right? And so no matter how close they tell you it will be, they will never tell you, I can guarantee that this looks exactly the way it would look if 100% of your residents took this survey. So that's one caveat. Another is that in our experience, the cross-sectional nature of a steering committee, it can be defined different ways, right? And so depending on what the community feels is important in terms of representation, that can help drive what the steering committee looks like. So if a community says, it's hard to get everything, right? Because if we had a steering committee of 85 or 153, you might have enough people in there where you could capture all the nuance of the human beings that live in this town, right? But if you got to narrow it down to 15, inevitably something's going to fall off the table. That's just the way it is. So if a community says, we understand that, and what's most important to us is racial diversity, right? If we're 12% Hispanic and 8% African American and 2% Asian, we want that on the steering committee, right? Make those numbers work somehow. That's a methodology you could use to build a steering committee. A community could say, what's more important to us is we have 25% of our town is retail space. So we want 1 in 4 of your people, of your steering committee members, to be from the retail community or the commercial real estate community, right? And the rest we want split between renters and owners a certain way, right? So there are different ways you can do it based on what is really of the most interest to you. Having said all that, what we have found works best is not a rigid combination of these folks, but as a general sort of set of guiding parameters. You want some longtime residents, you want some newcomers. You want some older folks, you want some younger folks. You want some small business people. You want somebody from the educational community, right? But sometimes it's a school superintendent if you're in a small enough town, other times it's not, but somebody from that world. And then there are a handful of other things that we could provide to you in writing, because I probably forgot them off the top of my head. But around the issues that we tend to work on in communities around economic development, housing, neighborhood quality of life, all of those things, if we can catch those groups and a couple others, as I said, that I probably forgot here as we sit here tonight, we would feel like you would have a good representation from Wheat Ridge on those particular issues. Does that answer make sense generally?
I understand where you're going. Thank you. Just make the effort.
Yep.
Mr. Fitzgerald.
Okay, this is a snagily detailed question based on my lack of ability to understand. Well, the person who wrote this answer, but I think, Eric, you probably wrote this. I'm on page 11, and one of the bullet points is age. And it says, and I quote, "The city has historically had one of the oldest median ages in the Denver metropolitan region. In 2014, the median age was 42.5, well above the Metro Denver median age of 36, and the Jefferson County median of 40.4. However, notable, the median age has decreased in Wheat Ridge from 2009 to 14 from 43.6, a full 1.1 years of decrease, while Jefferson County median age increased by 0.9% during the same period. I'm having a hard time recognizing or reconciling the 43.6 and the 40.4.
And just to clarify
Page
real
11.
quick, it's page 7 of the staff memo, but this is information from the demographic data update that we did in 2014, so it didn't come from Eric. This came from Patty Silverstein, who did the update on our demographics, but we still may be able to answer your question.
Do you have any idea what it means?
Well, essentially, I think I need to read it again, but essentially, to simplify it, it's saying that our median age, is decreasing in Wheat Ridge.
That's true, but it doesn't say that we were ever 43.6, except
We were 43.6 in 2009, and in 2014 we were 42.5. So while the rest of Jefferson County continued to age, we got younger. So we thought that was with all due respect to the sensitive issue, was probably a good trend.
Not in chronological years, at least in spirit. Additional questions, comments? Mr. Urban.
I guess my question may be to staff as it relates to the existing survey that we have pending, and how the information found within that survey will inform this process, or will this process be bifurcated from that and not involve those results?
No, thanks, Zach. That's a great question. And we asked Eric and his team to make sure that our survey results are incorporated in this, and they're analyzed as part of their analysis of all the other information they pulled together. I'm not sure if Eric has anything to add to that, but they're aware of the survey and its importance.
So you've got a lot of, you have had in the last few years, and you continue to have as you're referencing through the survey process, a lot of data, actually. And so I can't imagine that any of that's not going to be of use to our process. And probably it'll also have applicability, I'm sure, outside of our process.
Eric, Mr. Pond.
Thank you. Just more comments. I think some of the questions I think we've already hit on. I just want to say that I support the overall effort, and just want to reiterate a few things. And I will say this, that the NRS was important. What I'm about to say you may challenge the importance after I say it, but I mean, it was definitely a document that I looked at, which I think sealed the deal for me to move here and to get involved, to be a part of the Citizen Academy and the Civic Academy when that was running, and to ultimately get engaged at the level. And I think that's what it was, intending to do. And so I think we should be really happy about the outcome of the last documents. And I think it's really important, as we've gone through this in the last couple of years, to keep looking at the things that are accomplishments. And I'm really happy to see that the first order of business in the three-part engagement is really looking at the metrics and the analytics, so that we can not only see where we're at, but to kind of understand how we've progressed in time from 2005 to now. So I just want to say that I really support that. And obviously, I think one of the biggest reasons to do this is that things have changed. Not only things have changed because we have changed them by using this as a guiding document and changing the way we do business and progressing things through our processes, but things on the ground or things in our economy have changed as well. We were not talking about Lyft, Uber, Airbnb, thank you, accessory dwelling units or any of these things necessarily back then. And so it's really important, I think, for us to pick up this work. So I absolutely support it, obviously, as we move forward. I think we'll all have questions about exactly how we make sure that we're successful in impaneling a steering committee. I think that's important, and we should all take that very seriously. And as Councilman Matthews alluded to, making sure that the engagement is not only robust but cuts across the whole community, and we have representation that we can really truly believe reflects the whole community. And so I think that's important. So as I am obviously ready to hear other people's comments, but ready to support the core proposal, and hope that we will have work moving forward to get into the steering committee and all these other things and do that work. I will ask for maybe a little bit of a description on the retail ad service that's proposed here for $30,000. I would say that off the cuff, I'm attracted to that as well. I think that that's one of the things that has changed pretty significantly from 2005 to today, is kind of how retail plays out on the ground in our community, or any community these days, with the changing ways of business and the internet and so forth. So I'm curious to hear just a little bit more about that proposal, and obviously to hear other people's thoughts on that. But I would support that effort as well, considering that the retail market, how we can be successful in our community, and that is really the backbone of our our sales tax and our ability to be successful funding some of the things that we want to do moving forward.
Was there something you wanted to respond to in that, or would you go to another question?
I can take that now if the group would like. Sure. In general, this kind of work is very, as you might imagine, very heavily focused on the residential market. And that's for a variety of reasons. Among them, the fact that it's the biggest land use in almost every community. It is what really drives people's decisions about where they live more than what the retail offerings are. So in general, people will say, it doesn't matter to me if the grocery store I want to shop at is over the line in Wheat Ridge or on the other side of the line in Lakewood. It doesn't matter. I just need to be able to get there from my house, right? And so in terms of driving your market and how people make decisions about how they sort of live and live life in your community, it's not the most important thing. In a lot of communities, that's not a message that they're used to. There's an assumption that your retail offerings matter, your commercial spaces matter, and they do. But it's actually much more the other way around, that retail is influenced by people's decisions about where they live and how they live. So that being said, we thought, given where Wheat Ridge is and given its everything about it, this could be something that would be really useful. Not just because it does impact quality of life and it does impact sort of vitality as we think about it, and quality of life as we think about it, notwithstanding the comment that I made when I started out about how people make decisions, but also because you've got some really important things, as you pointed out, about your fiscal sustainability, for instance, right? And also about your planning and land use decisions, and about how any residentially oriented strategy is going to connect with those things. So, there are times when we don't really give it much attention at all. There are times when we give it a lot of attention, and we wanted to sort of lay out this option for the city if it became important on the fiscal front, on the quality of life front, or for other reasons. But we didn't want to assume that we should bake it in. And the reason that this is sort of above and beyond is because it's the work that Mike does, and we've worked with him before. He's working currently in the Denver metro area. He's in Boulder, and he's elsewhere in Denver as well. And we are working with him now in Erie, Pennsylvania. And so, and we're working in an inner ring suburb of Erie, Pennsylvania. And so he's got a really smart take on how to think about the kinds of commercial spaces and retail spaces that you've got here in Wheat Ridge. I think so. And what he can do, the analysis that he provides is very, very granular and very, very segmented. So it's really good data and good analysis to drive decision making. I think it would be a great add to this project.
Thank you. Ms. Bozeman and then Ms. Hoppy.
So you actually answered all of my questions. I was going to touch on the project budget and what exactly the optional retail analysis would provide us with. So I really appreciate that, and I do support it. Thank you.
Ms. Hoppy?
Can you give us kind of a general timeline of how long it would take to do the optional phase 1 task?
Things shift and flex a little bit, from proposal to real life. But in general, we would bake it into the first phase. So we would have that information as part of our quantitative analysis, qualitative analysis, and then bring that into our engagement phase.
Ms. Hoppy?
Thank you. I funny because reading the NRS is what was kind of the final reason why Nathan and I decided to buy our commercial property here, and then we moved our home here. And so I'm excited to see it updated. I do support all of this work, and I support, you say your phase 1 will end sometime in September, October-ish, and if you're going to roll this into the first part of the phase, then I really support adding the additional the task of the retail analysis. So thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Ame?
Amy.
Your report calls for the steering committee to do quite a bit of heavy lifting. 12 to 15 people doing 40 or 50 meetings, 90 minutes apiece. I hope I'm not on that committee, tongue in cheek. What sort of support does CZB bring to that process?
Okay, that's a great question, so thanks for asking it. Essentially, what we're doing is, from the very beginning, getting the steering committee sort of trained in how to do those things. And so that's part of it, is from day one, we know we're heading toward that process, and we know it is a bit of a heavy lift. Although actually, if you do all the math, it's many hands makes for light work. And so that's why we like it. It's a very high leverage opportunity. So no one person has to feel overwhelmed because the whole group is doing it. So we'll do the training, we will scope the meetings, and sort of and making sure we're checking it with the steering committee that these are meetings the steering committee wants to run, essentially making sure we've got agendas that are standardized and easy to run through, that we have sort of pre-packaged scenarios and content from which to work, and that there are clear objectives and questions to ask so that we know what we're getting out of them. And so what that means for us is not only the training, but also all the meetings set up. And then it's most likely me showing up at a lot of, not all of them, but a lot of them, to sort of audit them, make sure things are going well, making sure if facilitators from the steering committee have questions, feel like they need additional support, that we're there to do that.
Okay?
And then at the end, we're sort of synthesizing all the stuff that we get as well.
Okay. And for Mr. Goff or Mr. Johnstone, what sort of staff support would you anticipate that this process would take? And have you considered who or how we would sort of organize that?
Sure, I think there's going to be a good cross-section. It depends, maybe on the topics of the agendas for the different meetings and different public open houses, but this is definitely a community development umbrella project, and so Ken and his staff, but I see Public Works, I see Parks, I see PD, myself, of course, all filling in when needed and providing resources when needed. So it's really a project that crosses all departments.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Duran and then Mr. Urban.
Thank you. Mine's more of a comment, and then I have a short question, but I think this is great. It has been 10 years, and our demographics have changed. What I'm really happy to see is the amount of community outreach, and I realize it's going to be a heavy lift, but I think we've learned from the past that if you just have a facilitator that's doing all this lifting, citizens can have a hard time with that. So I think it's great to have community people running the meetings, getting involved, and just getting that message out there. So thank you. I will be supporting this. My other question is, with the surveys, are you going to be including the last survey in this analysis along with this new survey?
Which year was that?
Is that?
We usually do them every 2 years, but I think we got off schedule, so it was 3 years ago, I believe. So let's see, we'll get results from this one in June. So I think the last one was June 3 years ago.
So you'll incorporate that
2015.
just to compare?
Yeah, so the trends are really important.
Yes.
It's often not the snapshot that you're after, it's how did things change from the last time, whether it's a community survey or the census or whatever it is. You're looking for those trends, knowing how things are changing, good, bad, or otherwise. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Mr. Urban?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As it relates to the retail analysis component, there was a mention of a proprietary lifestyle segmentation scheme that would be used to create a demographic and psychographic profile of Wheat Ridge. And so is that based on the profile of the businesses or the customers that are shopping at those businesses?
It's both. It's more about the potential shoppers, consumers, and understanding their wants, their needs at a very granular level. Don't you love that language, though? Isn't that great language? I didn't write that. That's from Mike. So, yeah, but it's in understanding what you're ultimately trying to do is figure out what's the match that people want that you don't have, right? And so that's what that process is really about.
Okay, and then just as a preference on my part, I think that this retail analysis is much more critical to our future growth and development and otherwise, where does the city of Wheat Ridge see itself in 20 or 30 years? And the residential side of the equation, I think, has been helped along with the existing NRS, but it seems like what we're missing is that critical analysis of our retail landscape and how does that meet the current, apocalypse in the retail environment. So that's, I think, where we would want to spend the majority of our time. So I would be in favor of this additional optional task, but as it relates to the work being done in the other phases, I think focusing on our retail and commercial elements within the city and asking residents what they want to see of that, but also understanding based on this retail analysis that we will have customers outside of our focus groups, for lack of a better word, that tell us what we need to do in the city. So we have sort of two different groups, the residents that are participating in these meetings, but then the retail analysis might shows we have other customers and their needs might be different from that. So,
Right.
thank you.
Okay. Additional discussion, Ms. Dozman.
So I think this is more geared towards staff. So after we decide like the demographics that we would like to see on the steering committee, what is the process or the system that'll be in place? Are we going to take applications, kind of like the boards and commissions, or how would that look like?
Yeah, we haven't talked about those specific details, so I think we want some further input from council on how they would like to do that, and maybe based on some recommendations too from CZB and what they think works and doesn't work, and but we can come back to you before that process is settled, if that works. That Eric?
Yeah, we certainly would have some comments to contribute on what makes a good, productive steering committee member, which might be different from the way the city would seek participants normally, but just as a criteria, I guess.
Ms. Hoppy?
It sounds like the majority of us are in a consensus, so I'm going to try to come to one that we can put our hands up for. I'd like to ask for consensus that staff brings forward a budget supplemental and contract approval to engage CZB LLC in a comprehensive public outreach process to update the neighborhood revitalization strategy, including the optional task for the retail analysis.
Show of hands. Okay, that passes. Thank you very much. Look forward to working with you.
Thanks so much, Eric. Appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Thank you. Okay. Our next item number 2 is the community plaza on the green. And Mr. John Stones, are you going to give us a little, or Stone? Sorry to make it plural. Okay, I'm gonna go to Mr. Goff then.
Should we go around the table? Yeah, I'll introduce this. This was actually a subject that was brought forward by 3 council members asked to put this on a study session agenda, and a discussion of redevelopment of the green, which is the property in front of Stevens Elementary. I put some background in your staff report on how this concept came about. It started in the NRS from 2005, and it was continued through the 38th Avenue, or the Envision Wheat Ridge, the city's comprehensive plan, and then also followed up in the 38th Avenue corridor plan. They all mentioned gathering places and civic gathering places should be focused on and looked at in the community. So as part of the 38th Avenue corridor plan, there were some conceptual ideas put together, just very conceptual, and I included those in your packet too. So, and again, we had a couple council members that wanted to have a discussion on this. So I believe George and Tim are the 2 here that are here that asked for this. If they want to.
Okay, do
Add
we
anything?
have some discussion on this? Mr. Pond?
Well, I'm happy to just take a little swing at this. I think that this has been, as mentioned, it's been in some ways a link to a number of our thoughts, even as we've disagreed on some of the aspects of 38th Avenue, as we've looked at the comp plan and as we looked at the NRS. And actually, as we've engaged our community in events and other things on 38th, this has come up, pretty much every year. Frankly, one of the things that's missing from this, I think, is even some of the things that we over several years have seen as it relates to, kind of civic areas, even a relocation of City Hall, as we've discussed. This area keeps coming up, and I know that's not necessarily why we're bringing it to the table now, but I think more to say, especially with the activity and the engagement that we've seen in this area and some of the things that are going to be happening around the vicinity, to look again at reaching out to the school district and really considering how we could move this forward. This is just one piece. There's a lot of other pieces. Obviously, I don't want to nor intended to kind of get too wrapped up in some of the other conversations. Like I said, I think we've been utilizing this quite a bit, and I think, as you can see, even by these conceptual designs, as rough as they are, they, I think, in both cases are really just trying to create an organizational structure that helps support a lot of the events that are actually happening and some of the ones that we'd probably like to do. And then perhaps by talking with the school district, that we could enter into an agreement so that we could be more specifically secure the use and the functionality of that space. And so I think that would be my high-level overview.
Okay. Mr. Fitzgerald.
This is a rare coincidence of opportunities for us. I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe we already have a verbal agreement from the school district.
We actually have a written agreement. We have to use the space. We have an MOU, a memorandum of understanding to use the space for events today. We've had discussions with them about doing something like this, and they've been receptive to that. And I think the last discussion we had, they weren't interested in necessarily selling the property, but they were interested in working with the city and if the city wants to improve it similar to this, and I think they were talking about they would even maintain it for us. That was a couple years ago, so we'd have to have more conversations.
That's an opportunity that just doesn't come along very often. Plus, we have a 50th anniversary coming along. This is something that could be presented to our citizens as a celebration of our 50th anniversary. This is something that it was in the NRS and that we have talked about over and over and over again as a center gathering space, a focal point for our citizens. This is an area that we use already all the time. So this is just making an area that we're already using more presentable than it is already. And I think I was going to ask the city manager later. I don't want to be on the spot right now. But I believe the last and most important coincidence is that we have the money for this. And we will be able to do this without messing with our budget. Mr. City Manager, is that true?
Well, we have money for a lot of things, I think, based all on priorities. If you're talking about our reserves, I guess maybe you're asking about reserves. Yeah, I've been looking at we're still wrapping up, believe it or not, 2017 financials to get those finished before the audit comes here in May. But if I remember right, I think our fund balance at the end of 2018 now is projected at about 26%. If revenues and expenditures come in as projected for this year. So it was about, I think it's around $3 million more than our 17% minimum. So we're above $3 million above our 17% minimum. But all that again was based, I think, as you know, based on the hailstorm, the additional revenues that we received in building use tax, auto use tax, and building permit fees.
But our agreed minimum for savings is 17%.
The minimum is, yes.
Yeah. So I don't know how much this is going to cost, but I think there's going to be plenty of left over when it's all said and done. I mean, I'm not an expert in what these things cost. But as I said, I think this is a rare convergence of opportunities for us. And so that's why I'm for it.
Ms. Hoppy?
I am also for us improving this area. If I remember correctly, the school also had said that they would give us first right of refusal to the property if we did. That was their verbal kind of agreement, that they'd give us first right of refusal if they decided to vacate that property.
I believe they may have said that. I can't remember 100%.
Which, is important to me because we're going to improve the space, and then we don't want them to sell it out from underneath us. And so I think that it's important if we do that. Spaces like this I've seen in a lot of places that have worked really well. And when I went to a conference in Portland a couple years ago, I had to walk through a space like this to get to the hotel or to get to the conferences every day. And they had like Food Truck Fridays there. They had a coffee shop. There were a lot of people that were just hanging out, sitting around in it. Also, the Mountain Phoenix Community School has an outdoor kind of area where they do outdoor amphitheaters and stuff. Works really well for their school programs too. And so, you know, it would work not only for our community, but also the school would be able to utilize that. And so I support this. If I remember correctly, it was around $1 million initially was the initial thought. I would like to see a water feature in it. I understand that they wouldn't want it on while school was going, but a water feature would be nice. And then other than that, I support this, and I'm glad you guys brought it up.
Ms. Duran?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. So just to clarify, we have a written agreement right now that is still valid. And then but you're not sure if we have that first right of refusal in there, correct?
We would not. I don't think we do in the MOU. I think that might have been what Ms. Hoppy was speaking to, maybe discussions if we went down this path of developing it. And I think she's right that that's something that we would have to ask for in any type of an agreement. We would have to have a new agreement with the school district. The MOU today is pretty specific to the events that we have today. So it doesn't address any additional items of maintenance of a new facility like this. So there would have to be a new agreement in place, and I would agree that we'd want some type of safety clause in there that, you know, if the city decided to put money into this and they sold it, we don't lose it all. So.
Right, so that's what I would like to see, if we're going to invest the money into this, is to have all those concerns answered. I'm hoping that investing in this will somehow want our community to look and relook at 38th Avenue. Instead of trying to focus on 38th Avenue, then this, I think maybe investing in this. We already utilize it anyway, but we're making it something special, unique, a place for community to come. You were mentioning food trucks, which would be great to have in there. A water feature I would love too for the kids, would be fun, but it would then probably ignite the community to say, you know what, let's get to work and let's make a decision on 38th Avenue. So I'm excited about this and real supportive of this. I just want to make sure that with that agreement, we relook at all our concerns. Thank you.
Ms. Dozeman and then Mr. Urban.
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify, I don't see the existing playground that the little ones play on. I think it's like the preschool and kindergarten. Does the ice rink, is that where it's currently located, or do they?
You know, it's a good eye, Leah. You know, I think these were done before they made some changes to that playground, and I think we discussed with them after that fact, and there wasn't new drawings made after they moved the playground, but I think they, if I remember right, Ken, that they would, I think, is it fenced off now? Or it would, so that piece would have to come out of this, and that would still be the playground. This would have to change just a little bit so that they can maintain their playground.
And then the other comment that I wanted to make is I know Stevens Elementary would like an LED sign on 38th Avenue, and I think that would be a good inclusion in this plan, not only for the school, but for use of the city to advertise events on 38th Avenue as well. So I think that could be a good collaboration with the city and the school.
Mr. Urban?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think the concept of improving the green and otherwise making that a viable area for people to gather is important. I'm more concerned on the programmatic and the operational side as it relates to the use of food vendors and the service of alcohol. And I've attended several events on the green as it stands presently, and in several cases there wasn't any police presence available for a crowd of over 1,000 people, and there was obviously open consumption of alcohol and marijuana and the like. So as it relates to programming this particular space, I guess my first concern is relating to the food vendors. I'd hate to see us open up an opportunity for outside food vendors to sell food right in front of the restaurants that are on 38th, and I'd like to see if we can either incorporate or otherwise allow for the establishments on 38th to have some sort of preferential treatment when it comes to these types of food vending opportunities in this green space, because it seems as though we're opening up a kitchen right in front of their restaurant. So I want to make sure that we have some sort of consideration for the food vendors that are currently on 38th, and that also goes with the alcohol as well, that you don't want to see a situation where all the alcohol being sold is being done by some outside vendor and has no connection to 38th, or if the folks on 38th don't want to do that and they want to forego that opportunity, that's fine. But I want to be mindful of how this particular gathering space might impact the existing businesses along 38th. And I don't know if there's a way to do that or how we would approach that, but.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point. You could restrict the use of the plaza or whatever we're going to call it, that it's only used for non-food or non-alcohol events. I mean, that's something you guys can consider. It doesn't have to have food trucks, but.
Right, I just, the other concern I have relative to that is the school district rules around the service of alcohol and when that's available, and if we're not going to be able to purchase that ourselves, then we have to work within whatever guidelines they have as well. So.
Yeah, and they're currently allowing that as part of the MOU with events. I think it has to be after school hours and such, but yeah.
Mr. Matthews and then Mr. Fitzgerald.
Briefly, I had going to make the same point that Zach just made as item 1. Item 2 is, Mr. Goff, could you please refresh our memories on our current unfunded liabilities as a city?
That's a big question. What, any certain area? We have a lot of unfunded liabilities. Yes.
Well, are we committed to $10 million for Wadsworth, and is that an unfunded liability?
That's one project. We currently have an estimated gap of $10 million in funding. You're right. We don't have the final budget numbers, but that is the current estimate on what is missing. I mean, there's all kinds of unfunded liabilities. That we have storm drainage issues. We got roads. We got.
I was specifically referring right now to stuff that we're committed to.
Yep.
When I said an unfunded liability.
Yeah. Yep. Wadsworth's probably the biggest right now. That is the largest unfunded liability.
Okay, and we're committed to that. I mean, we're locked into having to come up with $10 million, are we not?
If we don't, the project goes away when the Dr. Cog funding would go back to them. Or we have to value engineer the project to a point where we get the budget down to the point where we can fund it.
We keep wanting to dip into this windfall revenue that we have, and I just want to remind everybody that it's not enough to cover everything.
Mr. Fitzgerald.
I just was going to say, what I heard Zach say was preference. I heard you say that we give, say, Right Coast Pizza preference to a food truck there.
Yeah, I think just in the sense, I'm not asking them to be out there every Saturday selling pizzas on the green, but it's a matter of understanding that you at least give them that preference so that they're not being asked to watch somebody sell right in front of their business. And they don't necessarily have to participate or otherwise, but they're given preferential treatment in some way that indicates that part of the reason we want people to come to the green is to shop and imbibe in the restaurants surrounding there versus sort of giving away the farm on the green.
I have a question before I'll go back to you, Ms. Hoppy. Mr. Goff, the drawings that we have, sort of one scheme. Would we propose to take these back to engage a designer? Have we done sort of a planning study on, is this really what we want it to look like? How would we sort of go through the process of getting this down to something that we really want to build?
Yeah, I would recommend that we engage a designer and fine tune this or start from scratch if council's not in favor of what these designs look like. I don't think that this was really well vetted during the process. It was just a very conceptual plan that came out of 30th Avenue corridor visioning. So yeah, we could start from scratch or we could amend this. It's, I think, totally up to council what they'd like to do and have a public process, community process to see what the community would like to see out there. I think it would all be favorable.
Thank you, Ms. Hoppy. And Ms. Dozman.
Sorry, I just have a live question from the audience asking about whether the pedestrian lighting is going to be the same, because I know that we've changed some from Harlan West need to be changed to the ones on the east side. Are we going to make those concurrent?
Pedestrian lighting on 38th? Yeah, we have a new standard fixture. It's an LED fixture, and those, I don't know if I've told council this, and you probably noticed it, but the street lights on 38th that were damaged in the hailstorm were finally replaced a couple weeks ago and should be working, hopefully. And that is the new standard that the city uses for its streetscape program. It's that black kind of dome LED light. So those were replaced from Harlan to Sheridan. So if we replace anything elsewhere in the city, we would recommend using the same.
I was just going to ask for consensus.
Just a second, Miss. I'm going to go to Miss
sorry.
Shaver. She had a comment.
I just wanted to answer something. The issue of food trucks with alcohol and that was brought up, and to get for special events, those are special event licenses are only allowed to nonprofit organizations. So I don't know how that's going to work with food trucks.
Thank you.
Somebody.
Mr. Fitzgerald?
Can Local Works, or does Local Works get the liquor license? So if Local Works gets the license, that's a nonprofit.
Okay. Ms. Hoppy?
Before I ask for consensus, I'd just like to mention too that food trucks is one of millions of uses for this area. So I'd like to ask for a consensus to move forward and engage a designer to look at some more specific designs for this area and look at like the next steps to move forward on this. Well, it doesn't necessarily have to be a new design, but engage a designer to move forward into the next steps of the process.
So that has consensus to it. We would probably in the course of this do some programming so that we sort of understood what we want to put there. I mean, just meant Mr. Matthews. I mean, right now this scheme is sort of built around a festival kind of booths and retailers and festival use, and that may be a great use. There may be some other ones, but I would guess that we would want to discuss that going forward. Mr. Matthews.
I've got it. It's kind of a semi-point of order, but a question of if we've just sort of won't this have to come back to council before they can do it, because we've actually just asked for you to do something that's unfunded.
Yes.
Just a request for the designing.
Yep. I think the consensus is to look at finding a designer, getting some bids, and bringing back it to council to a future study session. And then if you want to move forward, we'd bring it to a regular meeting for any approvals.
Thank you.
Okay, well, that got us consensus on item number 2. Thank you. We should move down our agenda to item number 3, which is staff reports. Mr. Goff.
I don't have anything else this evening.
Okay, thank you very much.
There's a basketball game on.
All right. Notwithstanding that, are there any elected officials reports? And I'll start with Ms. Duran. We'll go counterclockwise.
Not at this time, thank you.
Ms. Hoppy.
I was asked to clarify what the request was last Monday at 11:57 at night that I made, and so it was a long night. What Monica and I are asking for is that when there are special use permits that are allowed, special use permits have a list of criteria that they have to go through, and part of that list of criteria, it's 8 to be exact, and once it goes through those criteria, if they apply and nobody complains, then it can be permitted administratively. So Mr. Johnstone can permit that administratively if it reached the criteria. So If they don't reach the criteria, then that's when we see it as city council. So one of the things that I would like to discuss adding as a criteria is the use in question for the special use permit recommended or allowed in any adopted sub-area plan or comprehensive plan? And here's my line of thinking. If we have a sub-area plan and let's just use Fruitdale as example number one. We have a sub-area plan for Fruitdale, and we have someone who does not yet own the property who's asking for special use to use the property differently than it's zoned. When we use our zoning, that's how we paint the picture of our community and how we want this type of uses in these areas. So they're asking for special use to do something special beyond what it's zoned for. And so if that doesn't fit in with the area, like Fruitdale, we spent a lot of money updating that school and getting it to where it's at. If it doesn't fit in with that sub-area plan or the comprehensive plan, then that would be one of the criteria that it wouldn't meet. If there is no sub-area plan, or if that area is not part of a comprehensive plan, then it would be called it'd be an NA. So it just wouldn't be a part of it. So that's what I was hoping that we could have discussion about at a study session and look at moving forward with that, hopefully, I hope. So, is that more clear?
Mr. Fitzgerald, did you want to respond?
I want to add to that. I'd like to add a discussion on whether or not the special use should run with the property or run with the business. And my preference would be that the special use run with the business and that it be reevaluated on some kind of a set schedule, and that the business has to prove that they still meet the qualifications.
Ms. Hoppe?
I'd just like to so bring up and along those lines is that so we can decide if it runs with the land in perpetuity, if it's personal to the applicant, and may it or may it not be inherited, and shall it be granted for a definition period. Those are all part of our codes already of things that we can decide at that time, case by case. Also, we have in section, is it D? Where if that we can revoke a previously issued special use permit if they're not doing what they said they were going to be doing. So we do already have those built in there, if that's kind of what you were thinking, Tim.
Thank you. Mr. Urban?
Just comment briefly on that suggestion, and I think it's a good idea in the sense of having that criteria in there, but as it relates to this particular process, it is for special uses that are not in the ordinary, that they are extraordinary by definition. So I would just caution us in that sense that in some cases that this special use permit is the only reason that a particular business or operation exists is by allowing it through a special use. So as much as it's a part of the criteria, that's one thing. I wouldn't want it to be a black and white. If it isn't in the comp plan, then it's absolutely shut out. So as long as there's some flexibility there, I think it's okay. But other than that, I'm good.
Mr. Matthews? Thank you. Mr. Fitzgerald? Mr. Pond? Ms. Dozman? I was pleased to be part of the great Easter egg hunt in the city of Wheat Ridge about a week ago on Saturday. We had a great time. I want to thank all the citizens, and particularly their children, for coming out and making us all feel a breath of fresh air and a breath of spring. So with that, I hope everyone had a... Do you have something
Oh, I
else?
thought you were going to adjourn, yep. Just before you adjourn, I have something.
Okay.
That's right.
Thank you for alerting me. With that, I will ask Mr. Goff if he has anything else.
Just real quickly, so was that enough for everybody then, this explanation, that there's a consensus that staff can work on bringing this to a future study session? The idea of adding that criterion?
Yeah, obviously with I want to talk to you afterward a little bit, but I mean, obviously with an explanation of this.
Oh, sure. I mean, there would have to be another full discussion,
Yes,
but,
yes.
okay.
And these are just another criteria of which you have to get X number of X or X number of Y. Okay. We're going to go in order. Ms. Duran, did you have something to say? Ms. Hoppy, did you have something to say? Mr. Urban, did you have something to say? Everybody's hand went up at one time. I'm going to call us adjourned. Okay. All right. Thank you.